You're now listening to the Peach Pundit podcast, where we are expressing our own personal opinions. These views may not reflect the opinions of those whom we may be professionally affiliated.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Peach Pundit podcast. We are Scotless today, so it's just Buzz and me, and we are out here. I'm outside right now. I've decided that it was a nice day here in Cumberland County, Virginia, which is where I'm currently at. I'm at my girlfriend's mother's house, enjoying 70 acres of land, four-wheelers, and just quiet country. But I am representing Buzz. I got my Atlanta Braves hat on. How you doing, buddy?
It's doing great. I love the hat. It's one of those new, I guess in the NBA they call them city editions. What does the Major League Baseball call them?
City Connect. So it's
City
it's
Connect.
a yeah,
Right.
it's a takeoff of. So basically, it's an update to the jersey, the uniforms the Braves won in the early 70s. I guess up to the late 70s. So it was the jersey style they wore when Hank Aaron broke the home run record. In
Right.
fact, fun fact for those of you who, and I'm going to try to actually put this podcast on video this week.
Yeah.
So it's got the hat's very similar, just has the script A that the Braves currently use. But inside, just hit my microphone. Inside the hat, I thought this was really cool, and it was one of the first things I noticed when I opened up the box. It says "Keep Swinging" number 44,
Oh, very cool.
which I
I
thought
love.
was really cool. And the inside has like a cool design too. And
Yeah.
but no, I'm a huge fan of the hat, and the jersey I'm not as big of a fan of. It says the ATL on it,
Yeah.
which the Braves, Braves are I guess Atlanta, the A has become a whole thing, but actually I think
Yeah.
that's what it says. I think it says the A, not the ATL.
Yeah.
But it's funny, we were having this conversation. We're talking about Braves and uniforms and the exciting beginning to the season that we're seeing despite all the injuries. You know who's down on the ATL is the Democratic Party.
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
so the Democratic Party chose Chicago over Atlanta, and I'm trying to think of what the other city was.
New York City.
New York City, I think you're right.
Yeah.
In New York City, to host the Democratic National Convention in 2024. Which I actually think is really interesting. One, Atlanta would have been a good pick because Georgia, by all attestations, will be most likely a swing state next year, and it's one Biden carried in 2020. But Chicago is interesting because what was it, 1968? They had a disastrous Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Yes.
That was sort of the beginning of the end, and Nixon being the law and order candidate ultimately won that race. So considering the hyper partisanship of everything, plus the concerns about crime rates, Chicago is an interesting choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does. I mean, Joe Biden was probably there in 1968 at that convention.
Probably.
Probably remembers it well. No, that it was interesting, and I did have to laugh. I know, you know, there's been a ton of articles, and I when it happened, pretty much the entire front page of the print edition of the AJC was writing about this, lamenting this, and and I thought, well, they weren't that disappointed when the Major League Baseball snubbed us and yanked the All-Star game away. But then the subsequent days, they noted how Republicans were not really gloating. I thought, well, that of course, because that we actually want economic development to happen in Atlanta, and if Democrats from around the country want to come and spend money in our capital city, great, come on over. So, but
Yeah,
it is kind of funny. The disappointment was palpable. They thought they had it in the bag. They really
yeah.
did.
Well, you can't have an all-star game, and apparently you can't have a Democratic National Convention either. So,
Yes.
that's the
Well,
way.
I mean, I was ready to make all sorts of jokes about how, how horrible Georgia supposedly is, but the Democrats were willing to come here and have their convention, and now all that all that comedic material is gone, is off limits now. We can't do it. We can't use it. So.
Oh, Buzz the comedian, Buzz Chappelle over here, or whatever. No, I don't know. It would have been interesting because I would have liked to have, I would have likely come home just for that. Come back to Georgia just
Yeah.
to, walk around the city. Because I remember I've been to I've never been to the Republican National Convention, but I have been in the city in which the convention has been held at the same time it's being held. I did that in 2012. I was down in Tampa, and then in 2016 I was in Cleveland. No, 2016 I was in Cleveland when the Republicans
Yeah.
had it there. And it was, I mean, 2016 was like it was like a fortress around the city. There were fences
It
everywhere.
was.
Like, were you there? Were you there during that?
I was an alternate delegate. I
Okay.
was one of Rubio's alternate delegates.
Mm. Of course you were.
Yeah, it was a wild time.
No, it
And
was.
and funny, in 2012, Jay, I had the RNC that year gave out blogger press passes. So I was blogging from the convention in 2012 down in Tampa.
Yeah, and we did. So I did stuff while we were down there. Like I went to I went to a couple of different things, but and we were down there most days, but like we were just kind of there to kind of experience everything. We didn't
Mhm.
really. I remember writing while we were down there, but and I did a couple of interviews with people while I was down there, but I didn't do Bloggers Row. I didn't stay for any of the convention stuff. Hell, I went to Waffle House one night because that was the hurricane came through. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was like, I guess it was, maybe it wasn't a hurricane when it actually made landfall, but maybe it was just a tropical storm. But it had been a hurricane prior
Yeah.
to hitting Tampa. God, I remember that. That was a time. That was
It
a
was.
that was a time. Cleveland was. I was there for work. I mean, I was there for work in 2012 too, but like 2016, like Freedom Works had an event while we were there,
Mhm.
and yeah, we stayed out in Avon Lake, Ohio, which was a little bit outside Cleveland, and I didn't have. I mean, it was fun. It was fine, but I had more fun when I went down in Tampa in 2012.
Mhm.
But anyway, there's another reason that the Democratic National Convention probably decided not to come to Georgia. And let's be honest here, we have some embarrassing politicians in the state of Georgia, and one of those one of those embarrassing politicians is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who made more interesting, controversial comments yesterday, particularly as it relates to the leaker, the 21-year-old Navy Reserve Guard, Navy Airman, I guess, up in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
For those of you who haven't heard, a 21-year-old Navy reservist, yeah, Air Force reservist, whatever,
Yeah.
um, leaked classified and very sensitive intelligence information in a Discord channel that he was a part of with basically a bunch of teenage kids. There was one person who was interviewed by the Washington Post was like 17 years old.
Yes.
Um, and his name's Jake Teixeira. And based on what the New York Times reported today, this kid, he's not Edward Snowden. He's not a whistleblower. He has no ideological connection to anything. That's at least that's how the New York Times was portraying it earlier today. Let me pull the story back up. Yeah, he is not a whistleblower.
Right.
But he is being charged with making with unauthorized removal, retention, and transmission of classified national defense information, which is a reference to the Espionage Act.
Right.
And some of the things he leaked had related to the Ukraine-Russia war. And yeah, so this is what the story says. A motive in the case for now remains elusive, but according to people who knew him online, Airman Teixeira was no whistleblower. Unlike previous huge leaks of information, from the Pentagon Papers to WikiLeaks to Edward Snowden's disclosures, outrage about wrongdoing or government policies does not appear to have been a factor. Indeed, the disclosures were potentially damaging to all parties in the Ukraine war, as well as a future intelligence collection. While some officials, including President Biden, have downplayed the damage from the leak, it will take months to learn whether U.S. intelligence loses access to important methods of collection because of the disclosures. So no real ideological issue, concern here. No, he's not a whistleblower. He is, by my guess, a 21-year-old kid who's trying to impress some kids who are younger than him. And he's
Well, yeah,
and how this 21-year-old kid had access to very sensitive information, which some of which, based on what I've read, some of the things he posted online were not even true.
right.
So whether it was misinformation produced by the U.S. government or whatever, I don't know, but there was some information he posted online that was not true. So maybe it was falsified after the fact. I have no idea. But Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yes.
who is the purpose of said discussion, Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted out yesterday, and I'm waiting for it to load. She tweeted out, Jake Teixeira is, hold on a second, pull it back up. Jake Teixeira is white, male, Christian, and anti-war. That makes him an enemy to the Biden regime. And he told the truth about troops being on the ground in Ukraine and a lot more. Ask yourself, who is the real enemy? A young, low-level National Guardsman, or the administration that is waging war in Ukraine, a non-NATO nation against nuclear Russia without war powers? So I have one question for you, Buzz. What the actual fuck?
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is astounding, but I mean, Green's comments are, as you pointed out, Jason, he's not a whistleblower. He's not trying, that there doesn't seem to be any political motivation in him releasing this stuff. He's not trying to impact American policy, which, whatever you think of Snowden, he was trying to influence American policy. He was objecting to various things that the federal government was doing, and I would have preferred him to have taken the whistleblower route rather than just take his documents and flee to Russia. Nevertheless, he was attempting. There doesn't appear to be anything, at least that we've seen thus far, and maybe information like that will come out. But I think you described it well, and Jim Garrity of National Review's column this morning was, we're looking at the dumbest leaker ever, because it does appear he was just trying to, he was in a Discord group called OG, where he seemed to fancy himself the original gangster by bragging to his little buddies about this. And so for Green to
also to post, they all had like sort of an obsession with guns in the military, and also apparently like racist memes too.
Yeah, right, exactly. So but for Green to sort of try to make him out to be some sort of American hero, he's not. He's going to go to jail for a long time. And this may end up impacting American policy. I don't know. It's certainly, there's already been some reports I was reading this afternoon that the Ukrainian military has had to adjust their tactics and things that they were planning to do. The policy fallout of this is going to be, all across the world. It's going to be massive, because these documents reference all sorts of things. He seemed to have access to all sorts of unbelievable things that are dealing with many different countries. That the South Koreans are all upset. There's references to the UAE in here. There's a document that claims that Mossad was behind the protests aimed at Benjamin Netanyahu, and I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff here. And Green wants to make this somehow about trying to make him out to be some sort of hero.
She's trying. Laughable. There are two things she's doing here. The first one is she's making the white no, I guess I shouldn't say white nationalist. I mean, in some way it is, but this is the Christian nationalist line. That this is a white Christian, who is being persecuted. She's making the white Christian out to be some sort of minority, which is not the case.
Right.
Granted, demographics are changing, and they're changing fast, and Republicans haven't been able to haven't been able to catch on to those, or at least if they are noticing them, they don't care about them. And as an aside, like I spent some time earlier this week looking through census reports, because there was an update to the census in December, and people like resident population between the ages of 0 and 14 are now majority other races.
Yeah.
And which is, if
Right.
I'm a Republican, I'm losing my mind over that, because
Right.
you got to figure out how to message to these people, because they're the next generation of voters, and Republicans aren't doing that right now.
No, that you're absolutely right. And I mean, we can spend a whole podcast just on that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. And
Yeah.
I mean, look, this, I don't know, this may or may not play well in her district. It certainly is on brand for her.
Yeah.
As for whatever it is she's trying to do, that this, but yeah, I'm tired of the victim mentality.
Well, and
This guy he's not a victim, he's an
No.
idiot.
Yeah.
Who broke the law and is going to go to jail for a long time, whether
well, and there's
I
a couple things here, Buzz, that also, like, so that the one thing fits into her Christian nationalism nonsense, and then the other side of this also fits into her basically being a shill for Putin, which she's talking about, the stuff as it relates to Russia and Ukraine. And it's no secret that she has been a shill for Putin and the Kremlin. And she's making out to sound like, well, we have troops on the ground in Ukraine. First of all, we don't know, how true is that? And when was that? Because if it was pre-invasion, I think we did have some troops who were in Ukraine pre-invasion, but this would have been tantamount to advisors who were on the ground, and this wouldn't have. And I think my understanding, based on what I know, is everybody who was on the ground as advisors pre-invasion was pulled out.
Yeah,
now
I think that's true, and I think and if there is anybody there, it's there. We're giving them various forms of military equipment.
Right.
Not as much as I'd like to see, but
No,
you got to
same.
win this thing, you got to give them more. But the Ukrainian troops need training on these things. You can't just hand somebody, a military device that they've never used before and say good luck. Somebody's got to be there to train. So if there are military personnel there, that's what they're doing. They're providing training for the stuff we're giving them. Yeah. So, and the fallout for this is going to be huge. I think fortunately for her, her stupid comments are going to be subsumed in all of the other implications of this. Not the least of which is, how the heck did a part-time National Guardsman get access to all of this stuff?
Which in her role, I mean, this is more of a question for the Armed Services Committee and the Intel Committee, HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But in her role as someone who has, like, jurisdiction over oversight, she's a member of the Oversight, formerly Oversight and Government Reform, OGR. Now called Oversight and Accountability, that she should be asking these questions. How someone who is in this role as a very junior person in the National Guard had access to this information. Those are the questions she should be asking. And finally,
that's very concerning.
And going back to the questions about the any U.S. presence in Ukraine, there's the front of the war right now is in East Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It's in the Donbass. That's where the front is right now. If Green can somehow prove that we have troops in the Donbass, she might have something of a claim. And even then, I think that claim would be entirely dependent on where those troops are and how many there are and what they're doing.
Right.
But if we have troops in other regions of Ukraine right now, frankly, I don't care. Because if we're talking about Lviv or even Kyiv or whatever, those are not the fronts of the war right now.
Right.
And I should note that our commander-in-chief did go to Kyiv just a month or so ago, and we've had American politicians of both parties in and out of Kyiv over the course of the past several weeks, if not last few months. So,
well, I think just the other day there was a group
Yep,
It included Brad Paisley, the country singer, who
that's right. Joe
took
Manchin.
took to the streets to sing a folk song in Ukrainian, which is pretty darn impressive.
Did you see that picture? Did you see that picture of Joe Manchin, Brad Paisley, and Vladimir Zelensky holding the West Virginia Mountaineers hat?
Yes, yes,
It's like you're treating him like he just signed to play 4 years
yes.
for
The
the
newest
University.
recruit,
Yeah, it's like
defensive back for the Mountaineers.
yeah. Vladimir Zelensky announces his commitment for the signing class of 2024. He's going to enroll early and play wide receiver for us. So, yeah, come on, jeez, yeah. Anyway, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, with all due respect, just please stop
Yeah.
talking. So interesting, and I'm glad you put this on the agenda for this week, Buzz, because one of our Patreons did mention this to me over text last week and asked us to. He would love to hear our thoughts on this. And the Tennessee legislature, which is it's not a Georgia issue, but the Tennessee legislature expelled two of three protesting legislators, and there are some folks who are worried that something similar could happen in Georgia. And this is interesting because and I want to. I think there needs to be some discussion of this, and by no means am I saying that the number of school shootings doesn't matter. I'm not saying that. Uh, I couldn't tell you if there's been an increase or decrease in the number of school shootings. It certainly seems like there's been an increase, but I also know that when I was in high school as a senior and I graduated from Eagles Landing High School down in McDonough in 1999. And that was April 20th, 1999 was when Columbine took place. And I think a month to the day later, there was a school shooting at Heritage High School in Conyers, Georgia.
Yep.
So that would have slightly over, I think I had like a week or so left of high school. And Conyers, Heritage High School is about 15 miles away from Eagles Landing. And I went down there that night because a guy I went to high school with who graduated a year above me, before me, invited me to play church league softball down in Conyers that night. So we drove past the place where we played was just past the high school.
Wow.
So we drove past the high school. I have never seen so many news vans in my entire life.
Yeah.
The football field was completely covered. The parking lot of the school was completely covered. I think 6 people were shot. No one was killed. In this particular instance, the boy who shot up the school, who I think was let out of state prison in 2016, if memory serves. I don't remember his name. Had just gone through a really bad breakup with his girlfriend and just really couldn't handle it. So that was what led him, and he had planned on committing suicide at the school, but was I don't remember if he just was unsuccessful or someone managed to talk him out of it.
Yeah.
But you know, if a school shooting like this were to happen in Georgia, like what we've seen in Nashville or in Florida or you know, anywhere else where they've happened over the course of the past year or so, would we see something like this in Georgia, Buzz? And you're the expert on the General Assembly. So what A, what do you think it would happen? B, what do you think the reaction would be?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was watching, excuse me, I was watching some of the debate in the Tennessee legislature as they were, you know, trying to decide whether to expel these members or not, and you know, we can talk about all of that and stuff. So, but I think the first thought that came to my mind really was that we had an incident, a near incident, I should say, during the debate over the heartbeat bill. Not the heartbeat bill, the 6-week, yeah, that is the field heartbeat bill. Just a couple years ago, and there was a Democratic member in the well speaking against the bill. Her time expired. The speaker told her that her time expired. She continued to talk. The speaker told her again a couple of times. Speaker Ralston gave her a lot of latitude. This was, if memory serves, it was Representative Renita Shannon. If I'm wrong about that, I don't think I am. But anyway, a trooper started to come to remove her from the well because she persisted and would not leave. And Representative Calvin Smyre hopped up and went to her and was able to coax her peaceably out of the well. Otherwise, we would have had an incident where a trooper, removed her from the well, and that would not have been a pretty scene. That would have been really, really bad. So my first thought was about this whole Tennessee thing was apparently there were no Calvin Smyres in the Tennessee legislature among the Tennessee Democrats, and but then I think you know, you're asking questions about the react. How would Georgia react? I think a couple of things, and it's oddly enough, just yesterday I was back at the Capitol. I'd been invited to talk to a group of students, Georgia Tech students there, who were in public policy, considering a career in some aspect or another of politics. And they had four legislators there who were talking to them, and the first question posed to these legislators was, "Hey, what happened in Tennessee? What are your thoughts on it? And could that happen here?" Two Republicans, two Democrats, all four of them said, "I don't think it would happen here because we generally get along." I mean, there are intense debates. Obviously, the one I talked about was anytime you take up an abortion bill, the debate is intense, no doubt about it. But there are folks like Calvin Smyre in the Democrat and Republican Party, respected members who would pull a member aside before things got out of hand. So I don't know that first of all, I don't know in Georgia if it would have reached that point like it did in Tennessee, where you had three members essentially shut down the entire legislature, right? But then I think the reaction to it, and this is where on an emotional level, I understand why the Tennessee Republicans did what they did. I can understand being really angry that these three members grabbed bullhorns, led the gallery, the people in the gallery in a chant, totally shut down. You can't have that in a legislative body, any legislative body, where members feel like they can just come up and shut down the entire proceeding. So I get there had to be consequences to that. I think, unfortunately, by immediately going to expel them, they've made the matter much worse. They should have stepped back and thought about this for a little while. They probably should have sent it to the whatever their version of the ethics committee is, and let's let the due process, give these members due process, let the deliberative nature of the legislature play out, and figure out because I mean what they've done, what's happened. They're back in the legislature. They're going to win re-election in a special election, and now they are media superstars. So
yeah, and
you ended up worse off than you were 2 weeks ago.
It's really funny because first of all, let me say there could have. I don't know the rules of the Tennessee legislature, General Assembly. I don't know what potential actions they had to sanction these individuals. But I imagine loss of committee assignments, censure, were options that could have been considered. That is standard practice. I know that's standard practice in the Georgia General Assembly. You can strip committee assignments. That happened to the 6 guys who voted against the budget in Georgia back in 2006 or 2007.
Sure.
They were stripped of committee assignments. Tom Graves lost a subcommittee chairmanship or committee chairmanship, if memory serves, back when he actually believed the things he said. But
Jason Pye at peachpundit.com. There's not Buzz.
But my point is, they could have taken other actions. Immediately, removing them from office expulsion seemed to be overkill, to say the least. And but not only that, you've created a scenario where you have 2 guys who and look, it's a bad look for Republicans. Their first names are Justin. I don't remember their last names, but they're both black. And the woman who was 60 years old, who didn't get expelled, was white.
Yeah.
So you have a majority you have it's a horrible look.
Yeah.
And that also goes back into some of our demographic conversations because um the thing I'll the current generation is so much more racially diverse
Yes.
than people want to realize. And I go back to some of the I mean, I wrote something at my personal Substack, for those of you who are interested. It's exilepolicy.substack.com. And the most recent post I wrote, April 12th, is about the demographic shifts in the country, and 51.1% of the resident population was born in 1983 or after. And some people would say, well, that's got to be similar to, there's got to be comparisons. And sure, if you look back at the 2010 census, the similarly aged cohort that was born in 1971, 2000 to 2010 was 53.6% of the population. But the key difference is the people who were born in 1983 or later are more racially diverse. Almost 56% of the 1971 and later cohort is white, while under 52% of the 1983 or later cohort is white. And I've already pointed out that a majority of the resident population born in 2008 or later so that would put them up to the age of 14, is only 48.7% white.
Yeah.
So, and for comparison, in 2010, 53% of the comparison cohort those were born in 1995. Those 53% of those are white. So it's just like these changing demographics, this 1983 or later age group. So it's more racially diverse. It's also more socially accepting. And so Republicans are really setting themselves up, I think, for a lot of pain. It's a horrible look. You're going to start losing these voters more. Not only to mention that, not only the fact that you're having problems on like the abortion issue too, because you have that case down in Texas that's going to restrict the medication abortions, and this issue is already a hot button issue. And medication abortions, by the way, are more than half of all abortions in the United States. So you're talking about, I am not making predictions on what's going to happen in 2024. I can tell you that I will make this prediction: if Trump is at the top of the ticket, Republicans lose. They lose the White House again. But in terms of what happens in the House and Senate, I think it's likely that the House tilts back Democrats. But if Republicans keep handling racial issues this way, and keep handling abortion in the way they're handling abortion, I'm not convinced they'll take the Senate, and they should, because they have the numbers are on their side. But I'm not convinced they're going to take the Senate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. First, I'll say demographics are not destiny, and just ask Ru Teixeira about that. He wrote the book a number of years ago, more or less predicting a permanent Democratic majority. It hasn't happened yet, and he's now. Democrats won't listen to him, so now he's working at the American Enterprise Institute. But I think I agree with a lot of what you said, Jason. And it is, I think, the thing with dealing with these two young African American men. I think a problem that Republican legislators in this situation have to grapple with, they don't really think about the optics of it, and it's sort of built in the Republican mindset. There are rules. You must follow them. If you don't follow them, then you will suffer the consequences. And in general, I agree with that. But you have to take a step back and say, all right, if we end up expelling two young African American members who just got here, I mean, these guys they're in their first legislative session. That's how new these two guys are. I don't know about the lady, but if we expel them, not her, it really undermines we did this because they broke the rules. And it does allow your opponents to come in and say, you're picked on the two young black guys. And and I just don't know that enough Republicans think about things like that. And you're right, Jason. Younger generation is much more in tune with those sorts of things. They pay attention to those things. You can be mad and say that shouldn't happen, and you might be right and you might be wrong, but that's how folks look at it, and you have to address it and you have to think about it. I mean, the abortion discussion is a whole other thing. I'll just say this, that Republicans have to find their voice, and I think what we're finding here is that there are a whole lot of Republicans who signed pro-life pledges, who in the past voted for pro-life legislation because they never really thought it was going to happen, and now they are, and now they don't know what to do, and that's playing out in disastrously for them electorally thus far. And you're right, if they don't start to find their voice on this, if they don't start to come up with a coherent argument as to why you called it, well, chemical abortion is what the pro-lifers would call the pill. But if we don't find a voice on that and start to articulate it clearly, a pro-life message, they will continue to lose elections. I don't think it's a lost cause for Republicans, because there are so many people who would, in their own minds at least, consider themselves pro-life and would not be in favor of just blanket abortion, minimal restrictions and just abortion everywhere. That's a losing issue for the left too, to continue to push things to the extreme. So, how that all plays out. But you're right, the Republicans have to find their voice on this. They're getting their butts whipped, as evidenced by most recently the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, you have a majority liberal Supreme Court in Wisconsin. But
can we call them leftists? Because as someone who identifies as classically liberal,
yeah, no, you're right. Leftist is much more accurate. You're right. Yeah, so I think, and this this kind of gets back, circling back to how the Republicans handle Tennessee. I don't want to. I'm not trying to. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't there. There's been some raising of questions about some of the other things, the behaviors that these two young men have engaged in their brief time in the legislature, and that maybe that's relevant, but it should have been in that all of that stuff. If that's what you wanted to do, expel them for all sorts of other things, that should have been spelled out, but they made it just about the one incident, and that's the problem. But I think, to me, this points to an even bigger issue. These two young men were activists. They came out of the activist class to get elected, and they don't really consider themselves legislators. They still consider themselves activists. And this is what you do when you're an activist. You can't get the bill passed that you want to pass, so you take the fight to the streets. And that's why there were massive numbers of people in the building protesting, as is their right as free citizens of the state of Tennessee to come and express their viewpoint to their legislators. They have every right to do that. But legislators have different responsibility and should conduct themselves differently. So I think it's kind of, to me, it's kind of a symptom. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I put her in that same category. She views herself as an activist, as opposed to AOC considers herself, behaves as an activist, not as a legislator. And so I think this is a general problem in politics. I'm more worried about that we see more of these sorts of things in state legislatures. I'm more worried about that happening in Georgia, where a couple of people get angry about something and attempt to shut down the business of the House, than I am about them getting expelled. Because for one thing, Georgia doesn't have a supermajority like Tennessee does, and Republicans can't just simply pound them into submission. They've got to. They would have to get Democratic votes to expel somebody, and it's not going to happen over an incident like what happened in Tennessee.
No, you're right. Not to say that the pressure wouldn't be there, but you made an important distinction here. You're talking about the differences between an activist and someone who's interested in making law, an actual legislator. And I think that's an important distinction that a lot of newly elected folks who come from the left and the far left and the far right who have trouble learning that distinction, that and we've seen that in Georgia with some lawmakers who come from the far right, who think that sort of aligning themselves with outside groups are going and pressuring lawmakers is actually going to, result in legislative wins. They quickly found
Yeah.
that is not the case. With that said, these guys, to some degree, I have sympathy for them because, to a large degree, I have sympathy for them because I get where they're coming from because I was that guy when I was 24, 25, 26 years old. And these guys are in their mid 20s. And these guys are young guys. They're 20
Right.
they're mid 20s. And
Yeah.
it's still a learning experience for them. And that's another reason I think the punishment was far too extreme. Because they don't understand that there is decorum. They don't understand or hey, maybe they do understand, they just don't care. I don't know, but it is something that is when you're coming from that part of the I want to say if you're coming at it from those with those tactics, you do have to learn how to conduct yourself in a legislature.
Yeah.
And it's something that I see in whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or others who have come across in different levels of government that they have not been able to grasp. And look, in some of these cases, like what you do in your first term permanently affects your ability to pass legislation, even local legislation.
Yes.
With that said, I'm willing personally, and I would be, there's a punishment, yes. Expulsion, no, because that is just a gross overreaction. And look, you're dealing with a speaker in Tennessee who wants to be governor.
Yeah.
And look, there are some Republicans in Tennessee. I talked to one former Republican lawmaker from state lawmaker from Tennessee who said like they're making a tremendous mistake.
Yeah.
And one party control. All this does really is just show me that one party control is just like a horrible idea because, but anyway, moving back to moving from Nashville back to the state of Georgia. Donald Trump has a roughly 21-point lead over Ron DeSantis, and according to a poll that was released, I guess earlier this week today.
Today,
Today. So I don't see who did the poll. Was this an AJC poll, Buzz?
Yeah, AJC, UGA. I think. Let me double check. Yep, conducted by the University of Georgia School of Public and International Affairs between April 2nd and 7th, and 10th and 13th. Involved 983 Republican voters.
Every other Republican poll lagged in the single digits, and only 7% of respondents were undecided. So, and interestingly, they asked about the New York charges against Trump. Nearly 90% of Georgia Republicans say that criminal charges should not disqualify him from seeking office again, compared with 7% who say they should disqualify him. And just for a couple of details, Nikki Haley was at 4%, Pence was at 2%. In a hypothetical head-to-head matchup, DeSantis trails Trump by 10, and with 8% undecided. DeSantis has had, and let's be clear here, DeSantis is not not an official candidate for president right now, but everybody knows, everybody kind of thinks he's running, and he certainly has been laying the groundwork for running. He has had a horrible rollout to his campaign, with some foreign policy flubs, which is going to be the knock against him. He's being criticized for his willingness to vote for changes to Medicare and Social Security, which, folks, we got to do something about those programs. The old age and survivors program will run out of money to pay current benefits in 2033. Medicare Part A runs out, is depleted in 2031. At which point, for Social Security, you're looking at the trust fund being able to pay out only 77% of currently scheduled benefits. And Part A, when it runs out of money, it's 89%. That's how much it'll be able to pay out. So, and the reason I know all this because I just wrote about it on Exile Policy. So you're and so but DeSantis is being hammered for that. And the Republican base is, I mean, older to say the least. I know it's really none of us should read in too much into polls this early on, because we're 10 months away from the first votes being counted. But Buzz, the criminal charges brought against Trump, in New York, the likely criminal charges or potential criminal charges being brought against him in Atlanta, in Fulton County, and then the federal case that's being pieced together against him. Um, my theory is Democrats they want him to be a nominee. I think I even said that last week.
Yeah,
This is helping him. This is not hurting him. At least
yeah,
I should say it's helping him with the Republican base, not hurting him with the Republican base.
yeah. And right, and I think this poll, reflects the surge toward him, the rallying, I guess the rallying effect in the wake of what seemed like pretty flimsy, seemed like what a pretty flimsy case up in New York. But I think there's, and you're right to point out, Jason, it is very early. It's a long time before Georgia votes. DeSantis has had a a bad couple of weeks, and a lot of it because Trump and his allies are just pounding on him day and night, and he hasn't responded, and that's probably by design. And whether it's a good strategy or not, it probably a good strategy at this point because he's he's not a candidate in the race, and what else is there to throw at him other than what they do. The policy stuff. He did kind of correct himself on his his statements on Ukraine, which I was glad to see because I was very disappointed in his. This isn't a territorial dispute. This is an invasion of one country by another country. So he did kind of correct himself on that. I'm with you, Jason. On we have to eventually grapple with entitlement spending. I know Paul Ryan is anathema to a lot of MAGA Republicans, but Paul Ryan was right a long time ago, and others, and all the way back to George W. Bush saying we have to do something about this. And one of my favorite stories is, um, I forget which year it was. It was one of the years when Ron Paul was running for president, and sitting out in the crowd was this elderly gentleman with a Ron Paul T-shirt on, and the cameraman walks up to him after debate and what'd you think? He goes, well, all these guys are talking about cutting Social Security, everybody except Ron Paul. And I thought, well, that's that guy obviously clearly had not heard Ron Paul's speech because Ron Paul actually would have cut Social Security. But
Ron Paul would have made the argument that Medicare and Social Security are unconstitutional.
right. But I think that does show you the power politically of the issue, that even a fan of Ron Paul didn't want Social Security cut. Uh, so I think that's part of Trump's calculation, but it is to pretend that we don't have to do anything about that. But he'll be dead and gone when the rest of the country reaps the whirlwind on that, and so something has to be done. But yeah, I think to me this poll it's really early. There's a rallying effect to Donald Trump because of these criminal charges. I know I'm a little more optimistic than you are that Trump will not be the nominee, uh, because I think there's just so much stuff left to happen, and we really have no idea
Well, I mean,
how the public will respond to all this stuff. So
I don't disagree with you that we have a long time to go, and 10 months is an eternity in politics. But I have no faith in the Republican electorate, none whatsoever. None whatsoever.
you might be right. Tim Scott's going to save the Republican Party. So how about that? There you go.
Yeah.
I'll throw.
I mean,
that's my hot take for today.
I could vote for Tim Scott. I could vote for Nikki Haley. I'm riding the Asa Hutchinson train. Yeah. I mean, because I once ghost wrote for him. I ghost wrote. I ghost wrote one thing for him. Yeah, and like, but I will not vote for Donald Trump. I will not vote for Ron DeSantis. I will under any circumstances.
Yeah.
So, but my party primary is Virginia. I don't even know when that is. And
Yeah.
currently, my focus is getting my state senator out of office. I'm voting in the Republican primary because our elections are our delegate elections are this year.
Yeah.
And I'm my state senator is Amanda Chase, who is crazy. So I'm gonna vote for Glenn Sturdivant, who is one of her two primary challengers. And he seems to be the least crazy option. Based on what I've seen, he's not crazy at all.
Right.
But that's my immediate focus. And then next year, I don't even know when our primary is next year, but I will certainly vote in that primary, and I will vote. My votes in the 2024 election cycle are going to be based on negative partisanship. Hell, my vote in the 2023 election cycle is based on negative partisanship. So
That's a powerful motivator
oh
for most people.
yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with the term negative partisanship, it's basically like you're not voting for someone, you're voting against someone.
Yeah.
So
See, I'm convinced that's how Trump won. People were voting against Hillary Clinton. You know, that they knew all about Hillary and that we don't want any part of that. Let's give
and
this crazy guy from New York a chance.
and I don't get the Paul Ryan hate. I don't get the Paul Ryan hate. He first of all,
Right.
he is I mean, and look, this is you can separate the personal from the policy views, but one, he is an incredibly nice guy. I've met him on a couple of occasions, actually a few occasions, and he was an incredibly nice guy. He wrote me a note, which I have in my office at work in Washington, where because one of the things I talked about in the first meeting I ever had with him was that he and I come from similar circumstances. We both lost our fathers at a young age, and he even mentioned that in the note.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And then I met him again, and it was just me and him for 15 minutes before we did an activist phone call for Freedom Works, and he and I it was just the two of us and no staff around. He and I just sat there and just talked, and he was just an incredibly down to earth guy.
Yeah.
And
He never really wanted to be speaker.
no, he
It
didn't.
they had nowhere else to turn.
Yeah, he was Ways and Means Committee chairman when he ended up becoming speaker, and they had no one else to go to, and because Kevin McCarthy was too toxic at the time, and but he and then on policy, I mean, like, look, you didn't have to agree with all his ideas, but on policy, he would have put the nation on a much better course.
Yes.
So, but yeah, he doesn't like Donald Trump. I mean, I mean, like. I'm sorry, but he's right.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I'm not even sorry. He's right.
Yes, absolutely. It's a strange feature of MAGA world that everybody. I noticed that Jenna Ellis, who I think what she wanted Trump's attorneys at one point in time,
yeah,
they hate her now.
Why?
All because she said, "Why are we bashing on DeSantis? He's a good dude. Let's stop bashing on him." And that. She's dead. She's dead to MAGA world. They have turned on her.
It's so God. It's so stupid.
Their list of friends is getting shorter and shorter because they keep making everybody else into enemies. So.
And the funny thing, I'm seeing all these people make comparisons of Donald Trump to Jesus, and I'm like, you know what, folks, you guys are all gonna have a seat in hell right next to me.
Sorry. So yeah, I mean, oh. Speaking of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we mentioned earlier, she was one of those that was pointing out that Trump was arrested during, Holy Week, the week leading up to Good Friday and Resurrection Day, and that somehow that just like Jesus and just like Nelson Mandela, Donald Trump is totally innocent and a political prisoner. No, he paid off a porn star and a Playboy model. That's what he did. Okay.
While his wife was like right after his wife had his child.
I mean, maybe I missed it in the Gospels, but Jesus never did that. So Trump is not totally innocent.
Oh my God, it's so annoying. And Christians wonder why the evangelical Christians wonder why the church is hemorrhaging followers right now. Anyway, let me go through our list of Patreons as my girlfriend's mother comes around on a 4-wheeler that I can hear. I'm sure I'm sure everybody else can hear it right now too.
Living her best life. I love
living
it.
her best life on 70 something acres of land. Thank you to our Patreons, Bill Werkheiser, Shannon Ferguson, Stuart Wilkinson, Ari Schaefer, Ron Daniels, Mike Buchert. I hope I pronounced that right. Andrew Smith, our anonymous Patreon, Andy Allen, who is just an awesome dude, Bo Brannon, Ryan Graham, another awesome dude, Hunter Burnett, John Vessel, Reed Powell, another awesome dude, Benjamin Hurst, and Sam Thomas. You too can become a Patreon by going to patreon.com/peachpundit and just signing up for one of the tiers that's there. Eventually, well, if you sign up for the $20, you can get a t-shirt with one of our faces on it. Actually,
It's probably why nobody's signed up. That's nobody's signed up that level. They don't want a T-shirt with our faces on it. I can't say
I
I
mean,
blame them,
I mean, I know my girlfriend wants a t-shirt with my face on it. She actually told me that. So, like, Scott, in case you go back and listen to this podcast, my girlfriend would like a t-shirt with my face on it. So, actually, funny enough, so the people I live with up in DC, they I gave one of the t-shirts that Scott made for me to it's a married couple I stay with. I gave it to the husband and he was wearing it the other day. I get home from work and he walks out of his office and he's got the t-shirt on. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
I know my wife loves me very much. I don't know that she'd wear a T-shirt with my face on it.
I mean,
that's just it's not her style.
Maybe Emily's mom would also would wear the t-shirt too. So maybe we get two. But she's coming back with her dogs. So that is my time to run. Buzz, it's good to see you. Scott,
Good to see you.
we did not miss you.
Not at all.
We'll talk to you guys next week. Peace out and go dogs.
Go Jackets.